This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Beryl has weakened to a tropical storm after making landfall in South Texas as a Category 1 hurricane this morning. The storm system caused major disruptions in the Houston metro area and along the Gulf Coast.
Beryl made landfall Monday morning around 85 miles southwest of Houston, with winds up to 80 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center said damaging winds and flash flooding will continue as Beryl keeps pushing inland.
We've seen wind gusts of 70, 80 miles per hour across portions of the Houston metro area, widespread power outages. We still have life-threatening storm surge inundation ongoing. There are flash flood warnings in effect for the entire Houston metro area, as well as a few tornado warnings that are popping up in these outer rain bands a little farther to the east, closer to East Texas, closer to the Louisiana border.
121 Texas counties are under a disaster declaration. 2 people in Harris County were killed after trees fell onto their houses. According to PowerOutage.us, over 2.7 million customers were without power, including most customers in the Houston metro area. The storm system is also disrupting travel. According to the flight tracking website FlightAware, airlines in the U.S. canceled more than 1,300 flights and delayed over 1,000 on Monday. The National Hurricane Center has the following suggestions on staying safe.
You want to use flashlights and not candles to provide lighting if you have a power outage in your home. And please practice generator safety. We lose a lot of people after tropical storms and hurricanes to carbon monoxide poisoning from improper generator use. The generators either being run in the home or not vented properly. So please follow those guidelines and make sure that you keep you and your family safe.
FEMA and the U.S. Coast Guard have pre-positioned staff to assist with search and rescue efforts. The National Weather Service expects Beryl to weaken to a tropical depression Tuesday. It's likely to move over eastern Texas and then through the lower Mississippi Valley into the Ohio Valley by Wednesday.
A defiant response to calls for him to step aside. President Biden daring Democrats to vie for the party nomination as he says he's not going anywhere. Biden's also set to host foreign leaders at a high-stakes summit in Washington. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
And President Biden making clear he's not going anywhere. That's as he issues this challenge to Democrats who don't think he should run.
If any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention. I am not going anywhere.
In a Monday interview with MSNBC, the president says he believes the average Americans still have his back and that he's getting out there more to talk to them.
That's why I've been out. I've been testing myself. Been testing everywhere I go. Going out and making the case.
Great job on Howard. Biden, who spent Sunday campaigning with supporters in Pennsylvania, sent a letter to Democratic lawmakers on Monday calling on them to move forward as a unified party, adding that voters decide the nominee, quote, not the press, not the pundits, not the big donors, not any selected group of individuals. A small group of congressional Democrats are urging him to drop out, but more Democrats went on record on Monday to voice support for Biden.
What we need to be focused on is organizing and rallying around our president.
And this week is critical for the president. You have 3 days of meetings, speeches, and dinners with NATO leaders in D.C., and all eyes will be on his solo press conference slated for this Thursday. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
Leaders of NATO, the world's biggest military alliance, will meet in Washington, D.C. tomorrow for its annual summit. Member states will celebrate the alliance's 75th anniversary and also discuss how to strengthen defense, support Ukraine, and counter the Chinese Communist Party. NTD's Jack Bradley gives us a preview from the State Department.
Leaders of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, are meeting in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday for a 3-day summit. Topics of discussion will likely include supporting Ukraine in its war with Russia, protecting NATO's newest members, Sweden and Finland, and the security threats posed by the Chinese Communist regime. This comes as China and Belarus announced on Monday that they're holding joint military training exercises near the border of Poland, a NATO ally, and while Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is visiting Poland. The Chinese regime is Russia's main supplier of microelectronics and tools to build missiles and tanks. And NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that the Chinese regime will face consequences if it continues to do this, and he reiterated these points on Monday.
Leaders of our Asia-Pacific partners, Australia, New Zealand, Japan and South Korea, present at the summit. That demonstrates that our security is not regional, our security is global. And that's clearly demonstrated in the war in Ukraine, where Iran, North Korea, China are supporting and enabling Russia's illegal war aggression against Ukraine.
Another topic that's likely to come up during the summit is Ukraine's long-term bridge membership in NATO. President Biden has said that the war with Russia must end before Ukraine can join. If Ukraine joins NATO before that, all members will essentially be at war with Russia. The alliance is expected to announce more weapons going to Ukraine and further training of Ukrainian forces.
To strengthen Ukraine's air defenses and to help Ukraine protect its cities and its grid, the United States and several of our allies will have several big announcements at this week's summit. And the NATO alliance will announce significant new steps to strengthen its military and political partnership with Ukraine.
NATO has a benchmark that requires each member state to contribute at least 2% of its GDP to defense. 23 out of 32 countries are now hitting that benchmark. That's compared to just 3 countries back in 2014 when this benchmark was made. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
3 big-name meetings in 1 week. Hungary's prime minister has visited Russian President Putin, Ukrainian President Zelensky, and Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping for a Ukraine peace plan. He said the next stop is Washington. Prime Minister Viktor Orban met with Xi Jinping in Beijing today. Orban posted a photo of himself with a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry. He captioned the photo, Peace Mission 3.0. Hungary took over the rotating presidency of the European Union last week, and Orban has visited Kyiv and Moscow since then. His trip to Moscow sparked a wave of criticism from his fellow leaders. The European Council's president said the EU rotating presidency has no mandate to engage with Russia on behalf of the EU, while European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said appeasement will not stop Putin. Hungary has become an important trade and investment partner for China. It was the first European country to join Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. Its economic minister praised the project this February. Hungary also kept close economic ties with Russia and has refused to send weapons to Kyiv. Orban's China trip came after the EU said it was imposed tariffs of up to 37% on Chinese electric cars. Ukrainian officials say at least 36 civilians are dead after what they're calling the deadliest Russian airstrike in months. The Kremlin says it didn't target any civilian infrastructure. NTD's international correspondent Ariane Pazdar has the details.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Russia fired over 40 missiles on Monday. Ukrainian officials are calling it the deadliest airstrike in months. Russia, meanwhile, justified the attacks, pointing to previous missile strikes by Ukraine. Zelensky says the alleged attack mostly damaged civilian areas in 5 different cities. Among those, a children's hospital, a maternity clinic and apartment buildings. And that's just in the city of Kyiv.
We pledge to work on bringing Russia to justice for the terror.
The alleged Russian attack comes just a few days before a major NATO summit in Washington this week. The White House on Monday was asked if Russia's intention was to send a message to the alliance.
I can't draw the line that this is some sort of message. But look, I mean, as I said, what you're going to see over the course of the week is a very set of strong signals and messages that he can't wait NATO out, can't wait the United States out, that we're going to continue to support Ukraine.
Russia calls the allegations of striking civilian areas completely untrue, saying it targeted defense industry facilities and aviation bases. The Kremlin adds that the strikes came in response to attempts by the Kyiv regime to damage Russian energy and economic facilities. The State Department on Monday, however, said the US believes Russia did destroy civilian areas.
These are civilian infrastructure, pure and simple, that cannot, should not, must not be targets of military attacks.
This comes as both Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin are meeting foreign leaders on Monday. Zelensky is in Warsaw signing a security pact with the Polish Prime Minister.
We agreed on the formation and training of a new volunteer military unit, the Ukrainian Legion, on the territory of Poland.
Putin, meanwhile, is hosting India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
I'm very glad to see you. Our official talks will start tomorrow, but today, in this homely ambiance, we can calmly discuss the same questions, but unofficially.
Modi is scheduled to stay in Moscow for 2 days, discussing economic and military issues, as well as other topics. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
The Israel Defense Forces struck another United Nations school in the Gaza Strip, reporting that it was a hideout for terrorists. This comes as the war reaches its 9-month mark, with many still calling for an end to the conflict. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest and a warning. This report contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
It's been 9 months since Hamas conducted a surprise terrorist attack on Israeli villages, murdering over 1,200 people and kidnapping approximately 250. One of the victims, 19-year-old Karina Ariev, is seen being taken hostage in this video from October 7th. Her parents shared their thoughts 9 months after that tragic day.
It's something that paralyzes you. You don't know what to do with it. You don't know where to turn, who to turn to in order to get her out of there as quickly as possible.
It's really hard and I feel powerless. I can't do anything to get her out of there.
Meanwhile, thousands of people took to the streets in Israel over the weekend as the war hit the 9-month mark. Many of them called on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to push for a ceasefire deal to release the approximately 120 hostages still being held in the Gaza Strip. And on Sunday, Netanyahu said any ceasefire deal must allow for the war to continue, something Hamas has adamantly stood against. But the war continues on. Residents in the Gaza Strip gathered around a United Nations school in central Gaza that was hit by an Israeli airstrike. It killed at least 16 people, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. The Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, said they struck several terrorists operating in the school, which served as a hideout for terrorists. This resident explained what happened.
We came here running to see the targeted area. We saw bodies of children in pieces. This is a playground. There was a trampoline here. There were swing sets and vendors.
And on Monday, Israel ordered residents to evacuate parts of Gaza City as it continues its mission to defeat Hamas.
We can't find a place to stay. When we get displaced, there is no safe place in all of Gaza. No corner in Gaza is safe.
According to the Jerusalem Post, Israel is planning to release the findings of its first investigation into what went wrong on October 7th. The investigations will address why Israel was not able to prevent Hamas from invading the country and conducting the tragic terrorist attack. Jason Perry, NTD News.
In France, the left-wing coalition won the final round of parliamentary elections yesterday. This came as a surprise in the country as poll makers predicted the nationalist group would win. Political analysts say a probable scenario would be an ungovernable country in the months to come. NTD's international correspondent David Vives has the details.
Against all odds, the leftist alliance New Popular Front defied surveys and took the top spot in France's snap legislative elections. Latest figures show the left wing won 182 seats, Macron's party 163 seats, and the right-leaning National Rally 143 seats. One takeaway of this election is that these numbers don't reflect the number of voters. According to official figures, the National Rally had more voters than any other political groups, about 8 million out of 28 million voters. However, the large coalition from right groups to the left and the voting system have greatly disadvantaged the National Rally to the benefit of the left-wing coalition. Left-wing leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon called for Macron to resign in the aftermath of the elections. He also mentioned his party would apply promised measures such as a new taxation on high profits, a blockade on energy price tariffs, and a better welcome for migrants.
First of all, the president must either leave or choose a prime minister from within our ranks. The Constitution gives the president some prerogatives, but it also gives some to the prime minister. So both will have to get along in order to, for instance, recognize as soon as possible the state of Palestine.
The election outcome will have potential impacts on the war in Ukraine, global diplomacy and Europe's economic stability. But as there is no clear majority in the parliament, analysts highlight a period of uncertainty in the country.
I think what this means is that we're facing a prolonged period of instability, a long period of political uncertainty that could mean policy paralysis in the coming months, perhaps even the next year.
The three main groups of parliament are likely not to work together, which could block any new agenda coming from the next prime minister. Some political experts deem France is now likely to be ungovernable. The poor economic situation of the country also adds more concern to the situation, as France's budget deficit is skyrocketing. It's hard to imagine how the left-wing party will finance new measures. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Boeing has agreed to plead guilty to a felony charge stemming from 2 deadly 737 crashes overseas. But the victims' families say the plea deal is just a slap on the wrist. NTD's Sam Wong has the details.
It's been a tumultuous year for Boeing. After a month under investigation, the aviation giant on Sunday agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to defraud the United States. The charge traces back to 2 fatal crashes of the Boeing 737 MAX in Indonesia and Ethiopia several years ago, which led to the death of everyone on board. Now the Justice Department is demanding that Boeing pay an additional fine of $243 million, plus invest nearly $500 million in the company's compliance and safety programs. But no word yet on accountability for the deaths of hundreds of travelers.
I will never get a chance to see, hold, hug, kiss, and hear my daughter's voice ever again.
The plea deal is already receiving blowback from the victims' families, many of whom have vowed to oppose it. It comes after a 2021 settlement between the Justice Department and Boeing. The company avoided prosecution after the 2 crashes by promising to ramp up its safety controls. But DOJ said Boeing breached that agreement by deceiving regulators. This year, Boeing has faced scrutiny over its quality controls. It received widespread attention after a door plug blew off midair on an Alaska airline flight back in January. Under pressure, the company has since announced a string of leadership changes, including news that its CEO David Calhoun will step down at the end of 2024, a demand that lawmakers have long called for.
I'm proud of having taken the job. I'm proud of our safety record, and I am very proud of our Boeing people.
You're proud of this safety record, and I think the American public, when they fear to get on their airplanes, they understand your safety record. And frankly, sir, I think it's a travesty that you're still in your job.
Just recently, a former Boeing inspector alleged that scrap parts were used on the assembly lines at a factory in Everett, Washington. Aside from commercial flights, Boeing's contracts with the federal government make up a large portion of its revenue. The latest plea deal will likely trigger more legal disputes going forward. Sam Wong, NTD News.
Paramount and Skydance agreed to merge, potentially creating an entertainment behemoth and giving rise to a new Hollywood supermogul with tremendous influence over what people will watch. Here's the story.
Skydance and Paramount agreed to merge. In other words, Skydance, the studio behind Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning.
Ethan, what's your objective? What's your ultimate objective?
Top Gun Maverick.
We're going into combat on a level no living pilot's ever seen. Not even him.
And the 2010 remake of True Grit.
I'm looking for the man who killed my father. Man's name is Tom Chaney, and I need somebody to go after him.
May take over Paramount, the media conglomerate behind Titanic.
Oh, forget it, Boyle. You'll never get next to the likes of her.
And Transformers: Dark of the Moon. The merger has to get regulatory approval. Paramount can also accept other offers within a 45-day period. Skydance, in combination with Redbird Capital Partners and KKR, plan to invest over $8 billion into Paramount. 41-year-old Skydance founder David Ellison, the son of tech billionaire Larry Ellison, will lead the combined company. The deal could cement his place as a new major Hollywood mogul, able to influence what major movies audiences will be watching worldwide. Ellison himself is an actor, starring in films like the 2006 war drama Flyboys.
Any questions? Will we be back by lunch?
And the 2009 comedy Hole in One.
Great job, Eric.
In 2014, he participated in the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. In 2018, Skydance partnered with Tencent. Tencent agreed to co-finance films and market them in China. Few details have been reported on their partnership. In April of this year, Ellison donated almost $930,000 to President Biden's re-election campaign, helping the Biden Victory Fund raise over $121 million in the first quarter. Ellison's sister, Megan Ellison, is the founder of Annapurna Pictures.
A historic $16 billion investment finalized this morning. The agreement secures full funding for the Hudson Tunnel project linking New York and New Jersey. NTD's Fiona G has the details.
So today, I'm proud to say the massive $6.8 billion infusion of federal funds, the light at the end of the Gateway Tunnel, is signed, sealed, and delivered.
The Gateway Hudson Tunnel project will cost about $16 billion in total. $12 billion, or about 70% of that, will come from federal funding. This represents the largest federal funding commitment to any rail transportation project in modern history. The New York and New Jersey state governments will pick up the rest of the tab. New York Governor Kathy Hochul emphasized how the new infrastructure will increase visitors and money flow in New York City.
$20 billion of economic impact. What does that look like? Oh, our local businesses are so excited about families having more money in their pockets when times are tough.
The construction project is projected to double train capacity, improve the commuter experience, and create 95,000 direct, indirect, and induced jobs. It will also include the renovation of the antiquated existing tunnel under the Hudson River, which was built in 1910, in addition to the construction of a new two-track Hudson River rail tunnel connecting Bergen Palisades in New Jersey to Manhattan.
210,000 people each day whose lives will be richer as they spend time with family and friends instead of waiting for delayed trains. Railroad workers who will be safer as they travel back and forth through new modern tunnels. 500,000 people in New Jersey travel through these tunnels into New York. 22% of the U.S. total economic output comes from the 450-mile-long corridor this tunnel will connect.
The new tunnel is expected to be in service by 2035, and the existing tunnel will complete renovation by 2038. Fiona G., NTD News.
As Washington prepares to receive over 30 heads of state for the NATO summit, House Speaker Mike Johnson lays out his security agenda, seeking to bolster U.S. credibility and increase deterrence. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more.
During an event at the Hudson Institute on Global Threats to the World Order, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson compared the tripartite axis of World War II to what he called the China-led axis of present day.
I refer to it as a China-led axis composed of partner regimes in Russia, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, and even Cuba. Now, they each have their own cultures, their own specific sinister aims, but they all wake up every morning thinking how they can take down America.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson highlighted how the axis operates in the Western Hemisphere through countries like Cuba and Venezuela.
China, our single greatest threat, is engaging in malign influence operations around the world and is even working with cartels now, backed by Cuba and Venezuela, to poison Americans with fentanyl. China, Russia, and Iran all work with Cuban intelligence outposts to target Americans and provide safe harbor for terrorists in transit. And all these enemies operating in our hemisphere.
According to Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, U.S. national security depends on the government's ability to balance its budget while at the same time expanding military capabilities to counter China.
First, we have to strengthen our domestic position because national security begins at home, obviously. It's an uncomfortable truth, but our biggest national security challenge is our national debt. Congress has to prioritize the truly essential needs of our nation, and our national security has to be at the top of that list. At the same time, we must address the hollowing out of our defense infrastructure.
As part of this week's NATO summit, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson will meet with Greek Prime Minister, the President of the Czech Republic, the newly elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Joining me now to discuss the NATO summit as well as the security challenges facing the U.S. and its allies are two guests. Andrew Harding, who is a research assistant at the Heritage Foundation's Asian Studies Center, and Adam Savitt, who's director of the China Policy Initiative at the America First Policy Initiative. Thank you both so much for joining us. Now, Adam, I want to start with you. As world leaders gather in D.C. to mark 75 years of NATO, two Russian allies, China and Belarus, are holding joint drills near the Polish border, saying this is in response to the, quote, aggressive foreign policy of Western countries. How do you read this move?
Well, as your clip there with Speaker Johnson, he mentioned in that clip that there is this new, you could call it an axis. It's a loose coalition, but it's a group of countries that all have an interest in undermining the U.S.-led world order. And of course, NATO is a key aspect of that. So North Korea recently signed a defense pact with Russia. They have been providing loads of artillery shells that help Russia in the Ukraine war. What's striking about this is that China is coordinating with Belarus right on the border of NATO, right on the border of Poland, I think within 5 kilometers or something like that. So it is a really bold and brazen move, and obviously meant to send a signal during the NATO summit. But unfortunately, it's part of a larger pattern where China, Russia, Iran, North Korea all coordinate in different ways that are convenient to them, the unifying factor being to oppose the U.S.-led world order.
Speaking of Chinese aggression, Japan and the Philippines have just signed a defense pact as the regime's threat to the region grows larger. Andrew, what does this new alliance mean for the U.S.?
Well, this agreement between the Philippines and Japan is very beneficial to U.S. interest because it indicates that both are very clear-eyed about the threat that China poses, not only, say, to the United States, but clearly to their own citizens in Japan and the Philippines. This, of course, is all in the backdrop with China having completely unwillingly being willing to work with, say, the Philippines and the Scarborough Shoal, the Second Thomas Shoal, and the willingness to now, as we saw last week, be able to injure a Filipino sailor over waters and territories that clearly don't belong to them. It's clearly a pattern that has been going on for decades and actions that now the Philippines and Japan have had enough about. So this agreement allows the troops to deploy on the soils of each other's countries, allows them to move equipment back and forth, is very helpful for exercises as well as disaster relief. And it's all indicating to China that these countries are willing to work more closely in the face of Chinese aggression. This is not because the Philippines or Japan were willing to do this out of nowhere. It's because China is being belligerent about its actions, engaging in illegal activity, ignoring international rulings that have gone against it, and has forced countries to work together. So from a U.S. perspective, this is excellent, as it shows two countries that are defense partners, treaty allies of the United States, working more closely together, enhancing the cooperation, and willing to push back against China's actions.
On that note, Adam, to your earlier point, what does this tell us in terms of geopolitics, especially when it comes to a more aggressive communist China?
Well, it's ironically to our advantage that the Xi regime is openly aggressive in its rhetoric and in its actions, and this has pushed our Indo-Pacific allies closer together, whether it be rather informal arrangements like the Quad, India, Japan, and the U.S. and Australia, or this new agreement with Japan and the Philippines, because they're situated on either side of Taiwan. Not only is there the conflict in the South China Sea, as Andrew described, but also there are these two passageways to the south and the north of Taiwan. And in the north, it is bounded by Japan's Ryukyu Islands, and in the south by the northern Philippines. So these two countries it's crucial that they coordinate their naval forces in order to patrol for Chinese Coast Guard. China excels at gray zone warfare in the sea as well as the air. And not only do they use Coast Guard vessels, also their maritime militia, and also their fishing fleet of tens of thousands of ships that they use to intimidate Filipino sailors and moving cargo.
And Andrew, the U.S. and Philippines are defense treaty allies. Given that, how do you see this defense pact between Japan and the Philippines fitting into that?
Well, I think it fits in great to where it indicates that, once again, we have partners that are clear-eyed about the China threat. And this is really important. The United States is having vulnerabilities when it comes to its defense industrial base, as it's having to handle various crises around the world. So it's very helpful and useful to have allies that carry their own weight. They see the challenge the same as us, and they're willing to back their words with actions. So when it comes to, say, the Mutual Defense Treaty with the Philippines, we can feel more assured that the Philippines are not only having a strong relation with the United States, but are also enhancing their cooperation with Japan, another treaty partner. So what this therefore means is this ensures that China has to understand that their actions are pushing U.S. allies together, even without the United States being directly involved in saying as being a part of this agreement. But it also means that countries in the Indo-Pacific now have an example to where they can work more closely with one another, to where they all have shared interest in pushing back against a malign China, a China that is blatantly violating international law, and quite frankly is pushing us pretty close to a crisis moment, to where if we have one sailor injured last week, it can become very concerning with, as Adam mentioned, some of these gray zone tactics, how much further China is willing to push the button until we have a full-blown crisis on our hands.
Andrew, expanding on that, what is the strategic importance of Japan to the U.S.?
It is extremely important, and Japan absolutely serves as one of, if not the most important ally that we have in the Indo-Pacific. The Japan-U.S. alliance is a very strong alliance. We've been able to see great cooperation across multiple decades, certainly following World War II and certainly following Ukraine, seeing Japan being willing to take more of its own initiative on its defense funding, its willingness to take a more clear-eyed approach towards China, having a stronger emphasis on its national security spending, and its willingness to meet the United States more closely where the United States sees the threat of China. So when it comes to, say, a contingency in the Indo-Pacific, Japan is one of our most important allies that could provide U.S. services. Of course, we have a carrier strike group based there. We have various U.S. assets in Okinawa, Anderson, and so on, nearby with Guam. So U.S. territories are right next to Japan as well, and U.S. service members serve on the islands too. So when it comes to protecting U.S. citizens, when it comes to protecting a U.S. ally, and making sure American interests are protected, our allies and partners are safe, Japan forms one of the cornerstones to make that possible.
And Adam, given all of that, are we seeing a significant global shift in approach towards the Chinese Communist regime? It appears more countries are uniting to maintain a rules-based order in the face of this threat. What do you make of this?
I'd say there is a shift, and whether it is a conscious or de facto approval of and bolstering of a rules-based order, or simply acting in their own immediate interests. Either way, it's great for our interest in the Indo-Pacific. We like to say at AFPI, America first does not mean America alone. Our allies are absolutely crucial, especially in Indo-Pacific, as force multipliers. And we do still have the largest Navy in the world, but we're deploying it in the Pacific against China, which in theater has a larger Navy. So we rely on our Japanese allies, our Filipino allies, our Koreans who are opposing the North Korean dictatorship on their border. And yes, we are all coming in synchronicity. And despite ancestral or conflicts in the past, for example, between Japan and Korea, they are cooperating on the threat of China and this new axis, which includes North Korea and Russia, which, don't forget, Russia is also in that region.
And Andrew, same question to you. What are your thoughts on this?
I think Adam hits the nail on the head here. It absolutely shows that various countries are coming together to become fully aware of what threats China poses to their own interests. And so the understanding of how contested the region is, knowing that China has this large Navy, its military continues to expand, its nuclear arsenal continues to expand. We, of course, see a belligerent North Korea. We see China willing to pose threats on not only Taiwan, but the South China Sea, even further out to the Pacific Islands, as well as India and South Asia. And of course, Russia is just right on top of the North. So I think it's important to understand that this region will continue to be contested. That underscores why it's so important to make sure the United States can deter the threat of communist China. At Heritage, we strongly believe that we should see increased investments and focus on the Indo-Pacific, making sure our service members and military have the resources they need to fight and to win, to ensure that the American people are safe, that their prosperity is expanded, and our allies and partners continue to expand their own interests in line with America.
Andrew Harding, Adam Savitt, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Federal officials have authorized emergency funds to combat the expanding Silver King wildfire in Utah, which has scorched nearly 11,000 acres. NTD's Christina Corona has the latest.
The Federal Emergency Management Agency approved Utah's request for fire management assistance late Sunday as the Silver King fire continued to spread near Marysvale. Voluntary evacuations were issued for areas near the fire on Saturday, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency determined that the blaze posed a significant threat that could escalate into a major disaster. According to the latest update from the Utah Department of Natural Resources, the fire has burned over 10,800 acres since it ignited on July 5th. The Great Basin Predictive Services highlight the rising ERC percentiles across the region, indicating increasingly hot and dry conditions persisting over a prolonged period.
Looking at southern Utah, where we had another large fire develop yesterday, ERCs are already above the maximum, as you can see by the blue line, and the forecast keeps them well above maximums for the next several days.
Officials report that relative humidity will remain in the single digits across the lower elevations of Utah.
And you can see from our wind picture, we will have some breezy winds still over southern Utah and the Arizona Strip, especially western areas. However, these wind gusts out of the north or northwest will generally be in the 20s to around 30 miles per hour.
The fire initially began in the Beaver Creek drainage area of Fish Lake National Forest on Friday afternoon following a lightning strike. Officials have reported that nearly 300 residents in Marysvale are at risk from the wildfire. The federal grant will cover 75% of eligible state firefighting expenses, including equipment use, field camps, and supply purchases. However, this program reimburses expenses but does not provide direct aid to property owners affected by the fire. As of now, no injuries have been reported and the fire remains 0% contained. Christina Corona, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on today, but let's start in baseball, where the All-Star Game rosters have been announced. Now, you usually have a strong opinion about these. Were there any notable All-Star omissions, in your opinion?
You know, I thought the fans got it mostly right in the first place with the starting lineup. Then you had the players voting and the commissioners picks the pitchers as well as the reserves. I thought they did a great job too, you know, so I'm going to say well done to all of them. It's kind of rarity for me. The toughest decision, probably Rafael Devers over Jordan Westburg at third base in the American League. I thought Devers, though, was the right choice there. Now, in the National League, Paul Skeens of Pittsburgh, Maine, as a rookie. In fact, he was just drafted last summer, first overall, started the season in the minor leagues, and now he's already an all-star. I mean, he could be a fixture for years to come. Now, this all-star game is going to be played a week from Tuesday night, and this will be played in Arlington, Texas.
Over in Wimbledon, we have quite a contrast in the women's draw, where upsets have decimated the brackets, and the men's draw, where 4 of the top 5 players are still alive. What do you attribute to this?
Well, you know, the women, of course, don't play this any differently, but this is the only major that's played on a grass court surface. Much different than the clay courts of the French Open, the hard courts, the Australian Open, or the US Open. And really, each player really has their own, surface strengths. As such, you know, for whatever reason, the top 2 seeds in the women's draw, that's Iga Swiatek and Coco Gauff, haven't played as well here historically, and that continued again this time. Both were upset over the weekend. In fact, only 2 of the top 10 seeds are remaining on the women's side. Now, on the men's side, only 1 of the top 5 seeds is out, and that's 4th-seeded Alexander Zverev, who just lost today to American Taylor Fritz. An incredible comeback by Fritz. He was down 0-2 and came back to win in 5. And you have to say, though, Zverev is a much better clay court player as well. Now, also today, another notable twin, Novak Djokovic, the 2nd seed. He won today. He's now into the quarterfinals as well. He's won this event 7 times. Could be number 8.
Moving to soccer news, there's been a mystery of whether Cristiano Ronaldo would retire from playing for Portugal after the Euro 2024. What way do you think he's leaning?
You know, he's indicated that this was his last Euro Cup and his team was just eliminated by France in the quarterfinals. But as far as playing for Portugal, listen to what Ronaldo, who's 39, wrote on social media yesterday. It says, "We wanted more, we deserved more for us, for each and every one of you, by Portugal. We are grateful for all that you have given us and all that we have accomplished so far. On and off the field, I'm sure this legacy will be honored and continue to be built together." Now, it's that last word, together, that puts a lot of doubt into when he's actually going to be retiring. So I guess we'll have to stay tuned for that. Now, meanwhile, in the Euro 2024, the semifinals start tomorrow with France versus Spain.
In college basketball news, Uconn has signed head coach Dan Hurley to a 6-year contract extension to stay with the school after leading the team to 2 straight national titles. How likely is it that they get a 3rd in a row?
You know, looking at history, very unlikely. No one's done 3 in a row since UCLA won 7 in a row, but that was like 50 years ago. Looking at the roster, it doesn't really seem that far-fetched. Though, grant they lose 4 of their 5 starters, but they have one of the top 10 recruits in the high school recruits in the country coming in next year. Liam McNeely's a small forward. They also have one of the top players they signed in the transfer portal as well. That's St. Mary's guard Aiden Haney. You add that to the returning starter Alex Caravan and some experienced bench players. I think Hurley can do something with them. Now, I think the most difficult object to a three-peat is really the single elimination setup of the NCAA tournament. It's pretty much every game is a game 7. They really level the field. There's no home court advantage. It's much different than picking the NBA playoffs, which are a lot more predictable. If he wins, though, this year with this target on their backs, I think it would be his greatest coaching yet. I'm not predicting that, though.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For around-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.